Now, in course of the time from when I started reading manga, a rather popular trope has caught my eye pretty often, and that is the concept of humans and monster coexisting together. For series like Attack on Titan and Tokyo Ghoul, this theme had been the main concern and every act was based on it. And I must say the insights into the life of these so-called monsters and analyzing humanity based on how humans tackle the predicament has really captivated me. Now this specific topic had been the base of many popular series and each of them built their own set of stories abiding by this theme, and one such piece of work is Ajin. Ajin alongside Jagan and Hell's Paradise had been in my plan to read list for a long time, and I got to say after completing Ajin, I'm certainly not disappointed. Of course, I jump into any story without knowing the premise, but as usual I based my hopes exclusively from the manga's reputation, and it's safe to say that it lived up to it. Let's just say it wasn't as game-changing as AOD was, but it does its part for what the series is meant to quite well. Yeah, the plot, if I would say, gets relevant after quite a few chapters, but once it does, damn, there's no stopping it. Now I understand development and phasing indeed takes some time, and in Ajin it all seemed to fit together nicely. The story is about demi-humans who are prone to survive any catastrophe, or in simple words, they are immortal. And they also possess the ability to manifest the IBM or invisible black matter in short. What these creatures are, let's take JoJo's stamps for example and remove their unique capabilities, but at the same time let them have their own consciousness. And there you have a deadly weapon which is even more fearsome to humanity than the immortal beings which they are a part of. These fearsome traits of these demi-humans does indeed become a matter of conflict and discrimination against them, which leads the path for one such leader to arise who benefits from this people's situation. Of course, I would count the demi-human or Ajin, but most of the time in the manga they are referred as demi-humans, so I would stick with it. And as I was saying, I would count this demi-human as people, since they are almost identical to human, with the exception of their distinct capabilities. Now I wouldn't say how they originated, since that's for you all to read, but needless to say this bunch of demi-humans indeed becomes a matter of hatred for many people. And although they weren't as flashy as ghouls or titans, but humans, they just can't live in peace. And yeah, about the actual plot. So the leader, a demi-human, who takes on the burden to provide justice to his race, does divert from being a revolutionary to a merciless terrorist. And so it was up to our protagonist, who is also a demi-human by the way, to fight this monster by working alongside humans. Now what I like the most about the exchange of tactics between the protagonist and the antagonist, although referring the antagonist as the villain would be more appropriate, but I would be discussing that later. The cat and mouse chase between the arch enemies in the later part of the manga was quite reminiscent of Death Note and Legend of the Galactic Heroes, with all the tactics being there for the sole reason to outsmart each other. The setting of the story is in modern day world, so it brings with itself a sense of realism, even after having such paranormal things. So as you might expect, you get to see smartphones, guns, aircrafts, and many other modern warfare weapons, and modern technologies being put to use by each character in here. Although I'm a fan of good old hand-to-hand combat, but yeah, the gunfights in the manga work as well. Now, since this is a seinen manga, so it's quite natural to assume the prevalence of gore and bloodshed, and that's just quite what happens in here. It almost reminded me of Chainsaw Man since the violence was on par with it. But considering this as a horror manga, that's very subjective point of view. What the story represents is the value of human life and whether it is something to be played with. Although the philosophical values isn't very vibrant but very subtle. Still, in the duration of their actions, the clear message gets visible when the minor differences in the ideology of the protagonist and antagonist diverges to reveal itself in a totally different manner than what it was perceived previously. The development of the story is very incoherent because often it might come as getting pretty lame, but it quickly redeems itself, so there isn't much to complain. Although the story starts off slow, but gradually it picks up the pace once the pieces get in order, and thereafter it's all just chaos. As for the character development, the side characters are very bland, with little to no charm in them. They are mostly generic, only leaving the police officer and our protagonist's ally aside. Now coming to the main discussion, which also is the main attraction of the story, that is the protagonist and the antagonist. First, let's talk about the protagonist, Kei Nagai. Looking at him first, I felt him kind of being similar to Tetsuo from Akira, and the face structure also contributed to my thought process, and I was surprised to see that although Nagai wasn't as villainous as Tetsuo, but he wasn't someone who thought about the welfare of people. if it wasn't for the destiny of him being a hero. Nagai was a very rational thinker, and although his anti-hero traits did cause him trouble at times, but slowly he got into the path to reclaim the pedestal for himself. And on the other hand, there's the antagonist, who not only challenges the ideals of the protagonist, but as it turns out, he is the preacher of chaos. I mean, if I have to say, I would put him in the same category as Johann, Major, and Frieza, who loves to play with people's lives. So as I mentioned previously, Sato the antagonist is more like a cold-blooded villain, and that's where the differences start to take shape, which ultimately pits the protagonist and the antagonist against each other. I won't lie when I say that I liked both the protagonist and the antagonist because they brought a sense of uniqueness within their characters, mostly the antagonist. Sato is arguably one of the very cold and calculated villains, and of course when a criminal has no fear of death, you know how invincible he becomes. And that's the message what was portrayed through Sato. Sato would often come as like a very gentle old man, but on the dark side, he's an insane mad lad for real. So in my opinion, he serves as the perfect antagonist to our protagonist, who also is very shrewd and cunning. So yeah, the exchange of ideas and goals is very, nicely done. Although I said that the protagonist and antagonist are the main subject of attraction in the story, and that's quite so, since unlike Tokyo Ghoul and AOT, I quite didn't feel the looming threat of the Demi-Humans. So at times it felt forced to me, like the reasons for why they are even fighting. But leaving that aside, it was the art that for any given manga makes me stick with it. And that was the case with Ajin as well. As I already said about Nagai having a similar face structure as Tetsuo, and quite so, since quite like Akira, the expressions in the face of the characters and the facial features are very well done, to the point that it almost seems real at certain panels. Also with that, one fact that I want to mention is how clean the manga panels are. It isn't filled overtly with text, nor is the drawing very rough. It is very neat and concise, and that makes it quite easy to figure out what's happening in all the chaotic events that's been going wild in this story. Now at last, I wouldn't say that I didn't enjoy it, because I definitely did. And although I did took a break from it once or twice, but in the later half, certain things really got me invested in the story, especially the confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist. And I like the old man Sato. Yeah, I know he's a villain, but Grandpa's cool, I got to say that. I haven't seen the anime except some clips here and there, but yeah, I do watch the anime probably this month. And the only barrier that stands right now is that the anime is entirely CGI. But is it like Land of the Lustrous, or is it like Berserk 2016? Only God knows. So read the manga, it's pretty good, and that's all. It's just good. There are many plot holes which weren't covered, but yeah, that's all about it. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell so you get notified about latest manga content. And with that all said, zip!